Ivy's been working tremendously hard on this. Okay, let's give it up for Ivy.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to my Capstone. Today I'm going to be talking about what civic engagement is and the importance of civic engagement. So, when you think about civic engagement, you might not actually know what it is. But as defined by the dictionary, civic engagement is a broad set of practices and attitudes of involvement in social and political life that converge to increase the health of a democratic society. So basically what that means is that it's getting involved with your community, knowing your community, and making changes to support your community. So I'm going to talk about the different forms of civic engagement, why it's necessary, and how civic engagement affects our society. So while participating in civic engagement, it's important to know your rights and to respect other people's rights. The Constitution, in the First Amendment, we were given rights that support civic engagement. So that would be freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, which is like news media, which is very important to pay attention to. Right to peacefully assemble. So that could be church, that could be a protest, that could be hanging out with your friends. It's the right to gather. And then also the right to petition the government. A quote that I really like by Martin Luther King Jr. is one has not only a legal but moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. So what that means is if something is not right, but there's a law to do wrong, you still do what's right. So one of the best ways to get started with civic engagement, in my opinion, is staying informed. Because you can't get involved if you don't know what you're getting involved in. So it's best to grow your knowledge of current events, and that way you can form opinions and act upon it. The best way to stay informed is to read the news. You can do that online, you can follow social media accounts, or you can be old.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've made that transition occur now. Last but not least, the 9th and 10th graders, grab your backpacks and what you need for dismissal. You guys are going to wrap up this fabulous Friday in clubs. Enjoy clubs, have a good time with your friends and the staff members in those spaces. Go ahead and make that happen, you guys, and let's get there by 2:10. So 5 minutes to make that transition. Thanks.
Yes. So, as I was saying, you can engage in the news basically any way that's comfortable for you. We live in the information age, which means you can access information in a lot of different ways. Another great way to get involved in your community is volunteering or public service. So you can support any cause that is important to you. So you can volunteer with local organizations or nonprofit organizations. A great place to get started, if you don't know where to get started, is a public library, because they have a lot of connections to other places in the community, and they can really help you get involved. If you're really dedicated, you can consider a profession in public service. So that could be healthcare, transportation, government jobs, law, that kind of thing, because that will greatly support the community and increase democratic input. Again, another way of getting involved in civic engagement is political demonstration. So if there's something you don't agree with, you can engage in a protest, which is organized public demonstration of disapproval. So you can protest and you're protected by that in your First Amendment rights, although government can limit them based on the time, place, and manner. So if it gets violent or something like that, they have the right to disband it. So you have to be very, very careful if you're going to engage in that form of civic engagement. But you can also vote. Once you're of age, you can write letters to your government officials, and you can contribute to campaigns, whether that's through your time or your money or resources. Another very effective form of civic engagement are demonstrations, marches, labor strikes, boycotts, and civil disobedience. I would say those are probably the most powerful forms of civic engagement. Labor strikes and civil disobedience have been like the spearheads of most progress in our society. So protests, when they're well organized, are a great vehicle for change. Most of the reason we have the rights we do now is because people had the courage to involved with their finances, you can be involved with their communication, so if you enjoy writing or graphic design, you can get involved that way. You can also volunteer and coordinate volunteers. And supporting campaign is protected by the First Amendment as well, because it's freedom of speech and freedom to gather as a group. And also going to talk about lobbying, which is a way for individuals or private groups to influence the government in their opinions on upcoming decisions. A lot of people have mixed opinions about lobbyists because a lot of times they use their money to influence the government, but lobbying can be done in a very effective way where you use communications like letters, calls, or conversations to influence public opinion or the government. Can also engage in petitions. I know a lot of people think of petitions when they think about civic engagement in general. A petition is a group request to an authority or institution to take a specific action or make a specific decision. So the goal of petitions is to express that there's a group that has an idea and that there's strength in civic movements, and so policymakers will be forced to listen and act. So political petitions, there are different types of petitions. Political petitions address a rule by the state or federal government. Legal petitions ask the court to issue a specific order, and public purpose petitions ask officials to take or not take a specific action. So the best petitions are well organized, they have a clear purpose, they have supporting evidence, and they have lots of signatures that people agree with you. So those are a lot of different forms of civic engagement, but I want to outline why that's actually important. And this is probably the most important part, is that civic engagement is what leads to progress in society. Without people who know what's the things that are happening in society and have opinions about them and then act upon those opinions, society would be a really different place today. And a lot of times it's people who have the courage to speak up, who make society reflect the interests of the public. So a few examples of that would be in the 1960s when the Vietnam War was happening. A lot of students did not agree with that, and so they organized protests, a lot of peaceful protests and marches and that kind of thing to try to end the war, and their influence was very powerful and successful. Example of the student movement. So like an example of that would be they wore black armbands to school as a way to protest the war, and that ended up leading to Supreme Court cases that challenged whether or not students had the right to express themselves in that way. Another example is in the election of 2020 between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. That was the highest voter turnout in 120 years. So for 120 years, there have been 66% or lower of eligible voters actually voting. So it's very important if you want to have somebody elected that when you're able, you can vote. All right, so lastly, I'm going to wrap this up and then I'll have a few more activities for us. Even though some people think civic engagement is useless, they think that, your voice doesn't matter or that kind of thing, it does matter. And if you feel strongly about something, it's very important to speak up about it. There's power in numbers, and well-organized civic engagement can definitely make a difference, and it's the reason we have what we have today. Even if you're just changing one person's mind, it's still changing the world. Whether you're voting or working on a campaign or just growing your knowledge of civic engagement and the issues going on in society, civic engagement is a very important part of everyday life, and it can be used to change society for the better. So yeah. And then, so now I'm going to pass out some zines that I created. These are the Pocket Guide to Civic Engagement. So I made these by hand drawing, but then made copies of them. So I'm going to give one under the tables, and you can pass them around and look through them, and you can just read about civic engagement and that kind of thing.
Woohoo! Civic engagement, designed by Ivy Miller. It's so cute. Oh, so cute!
Let's do that.
Oh my gosh, what it says? It's for the AV Club. It says what Britannica says.
On the table, so if you guys are feeling overwhelmed, the more I also recommend we have what are they called? Cards? Index cards. There are index cards on the table, and I'd love it if you guys could write something you learned or write down some questions, because I'm about to have a Q&A when you're done looking at this.
Okay. And this is the hotline.
What is civic engagement?
Good.